Hi, my name's Charles Malki, biologist and plant expert with Ivory Organics, where we grow cool plants. And in this educational segment, we're going to talk a lot about rose care, specifically mulching, fertilizing, watering, plant diseases and control, as well as pruning and transplanting. Before we get into all of these extensive topics on rose care, we're going to first do a quick introduction of a lot of the most beautiful roses you'll find in Southern California. We're here at the Huntington Library and Gardens. Let's go and check that out first. Follow me. So here we are now in the rose section of the Huntington Gardens, and just take a look at how massive this property is dedicated specifically to roses. Check this out. Here I am next to a variety known as peach swirl, and the concept I want to share with you right now is the idea that if there was a center you can visualize going through the middle, like a stake or a pole going right through the middle, all of the branches need to be going and growing out towards the side as if it was growing in a base shape. Let me find you another plant I saw on the other side where they already removed all of the spent flowers, and you'll better be able to see, but the leaves are kind of blocking that vase shape that you would otherwise see. So let me make another demonstration, and then I'm going to share with you some of my top about 3 to 5 roses that I've seen within this garden. So come and follow me. So here I am next to a variety known as spiced coffee. And if you take a look at this one, and again, visualize a pole going down through the middle of the plant, you can see that the structure of the wood you can see better is in a vase pattern, meaning that all the branches are going away from the center and allowing each of the leaves that are now pushing out the new blossoms to capitalize on the sun to support the maximum number of blooms throughout the entire year. If you come a little closer, you'll see this is actually the next round of flowers over here, and you can see that they've pruned over here to create this new growth that will ultimately result in more growth, and over here some more pruning ends that are generating more growth that will then support some more blooms. And this is another important lesson we'll practice together at the home garden. But before we do, let me just share a few more roses while we're still here. Let's check these out. So here's one of my favorites that I've selected. It's a climbing rose known as Purple Splash. It grows about 10 to 14 feet. And I'm going to be using this as a decorative piece within our garden, and it's going to be one of the lessons that we're going to talk about shortly. Check out these roses. This one here is close to expiring. This one here, a newer one. And take a look at that cluster of roses. There's probably about 20 to 30 roses right here in my hand. And then watch the growing habit of the rose as well. And just to take a look, once you're done, if you come in a little closer, you can see here the sign. Again, Purple Splash, it's a climbing type of rose. So Purple Splash Climber, developed in 2010. So after visiting the Huntington Gardens, I got inspired to buy a couple more roses. I just spotted these and I saw that there was a climbing variety of roses that I wanted to introduce into the garden, as well as a most fragrant rose to add to the garden as well. One of America's most popular, which I'll share with you in just a second. But I wanted to share with you in this demonstration is there's a huge difference between these 5 climbing roses in regards to being able to pick. The one I wanted to get my hands on is this variety over here, known as the Don Juan. If you take a look here, this is the label. If we can read a little bit about it, you can see that the height is going to be somewhere between 8 and 12 feet. And if we turn it around here, let's read a little bit about the description. It says over here that it's a popular, free-flowering climbing rose. Don Juan is valued for its profuse display of large, fragrant, velvety, dark red flowers. Its sturdy, upright canes hold handsome, glossy green leaves and are an ideal cover for fences, walls, or trellis. And when we take this back to the garden, you'll see that even height-wise, average height again between 10 and 12 feet, and can tolerate temperatures as low as minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And I just want to share with you also how beautiful these roses are. If we can come around here, take a look at how many petals this rose has, and if we smell it as well, it does have a nice rose scent. Now, in selecting between these, I want to share with you a couple of things that I'm looking at. I'm going to try to get some sunlight here, hopefully on the plant. There's actually a lot of leaves casting a shadow. Hopefully here this is going to help if I tilt it. But you can see there's a little bit of deadwood that could have otherwise been pruned, some more deadwood over here. And as I look at the graft on the back, I can see that there's actually some damage that runs alongside the back as well. What I like about this one is that it's young. The thickness of the rootstock is not too large, and this here is the graft, and it looks like it's got a pretty healthy graft as well. So I mean, this here could be a possibility for us, not the one I'm picking, but if we take a look at the next one, this one's even worse. If you take a look here, this is the graft. There's a lot of cracks and crevices within it for beetles, termites, and disease to harbor within the grafted tissue. If you take a look near the top, this here is the rootstock. This is the scion grafted wood. On the rootstock, there's actually tissue damage running about a ½ an inch deep, as indicated by this darkness of the wood, and it's even rotting. If you take a look at the top, if I'm trying to get some more light on it, you can see that it's got all these black rot spots at the very top where it's been pruned, and again, some damage that runs down into the graft zone. So this one is an absolute no-no. And when we take a look at the third example, this one here, my daughter who I'm with, she's 8 years old, the two of us kind of guesstimate that this rose is probably close to 10 years old. And the goal in selecting a rose is try to get a rose that's closer to 3 to 4 years. Just to let you know, graft wise, if we take a look at the younger one over here, you've got to start off with a rootstock that is created. It's then grafted, which takes about another year or two, and then by the time they sell it, you're probably in years 3 or 4. So this here is about a 4-year-old rose. This one over here, if you compare the two, it looks like it's twice as old. Look at that thickness on there. And we don't want to start off with an old plant. We want something young to get established and grow on our own property. So this one's out for that primary reason. If we come down here now, again, some more beautiful blossoms I want to share with you. Take a look at all of that. A lot of green, new vigor. Some more blossoms up here behind it. If we come around, the reason I'm not going with this is take a look at all of that rot and damage and what I like calling the heart of the tree. The heart being defined as the trunk and the lower branches, and there's just a lot of risk of disease, termites, beetle damage that may have entered all of that exposed wood over the last several years. As I can tell, that's a pretty old prune, and again, this is subject to a lot of risk and disease, and it could potentially shorten the life of the rose. This here is the one that I'm going with. I want to show you the whole plant. If you can step back here, I'm still selecting this one, even though there's a damaged branch back here behind it. The reason I've selected it, if you take a look, is this here is the rootstock. It was grafted at this point, creating this grafted tissue. You can see that the rootstock is relatively young compared to the others. If we come around this way, the other thing too being that it's going to be a climbing rose. This is expected to grow about, as we read, between 10 to 12 feet. This here created some new growth right out of the crown. It's known as the crown, where most of the branches come out of the graft. Right out of the crown is this new young shoot, and it's coming straight out. Look at this, going straight up. If you can back up again one more time, you can take a look that we've got about 2 to 3 feet of growth that all came out of it this year. We can now prune a little bit off the sides and create this nice vine that'll eventually grow in the direction that we want it. And once we go back to the home garden, you'll see exactly how we're going to capitalize on this. Now let me share with you a smaller bush variety rose that we're also going to bring to the garden. Follow me. So if you're looking for that rose that truly carries that original scent of rose, the first rose that comes to mind is the most popular in the country, known as the Mr. Lincoln variety. If you come in a little closer, you'll take a look here. And let's read the description together. This one here again is called Mr. Lincoln. It's a red rose and has very fragrant, it's actually, as it says, very fragrant, double dark red, velvety blooms, vigorous plant with dark green, leathery foliage, fine choice for cut flower arrangements, and a height of about 4 to 5 feet, and again can withstand temperatures as low as minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. If you take a look here, this here is what the rose looks like, if I can get some sun on it. And let's take another smell. It's absolutely fantastic. I've got lined up over here 3 examples to also help you when selecting a rose what to look for. If you take a look down here, you can see that there's some damage over here, but again, it can be pruned back to where you can see that there's some basically dieback, even though there's some growth coming off to one side. So this is not ideal, as again, pests and disease can enter through this exposed dead wood and work their way into the heart of the plant. If we spin it around some more, it's even worse back here. Hoping you can capture all of this dead tissue, plant tissue death that's happening. There's a giant branch over here that was pruned back. And again, this is more entryway for disease and pests. If I were to prune this back to clean it up, I'm gonna end up with a large wound right there in the crown of the graft, and that's gonna take several years to heal. I would say at least 3 years, if not longer. So again, this is not the ideal choice, even though it's got some beautiful blooms on it. Just behind it here is another example. If you take a look here, you can see whoever pruned this branch up here, I'm hoping you can capture right at the tip of my finger, they pruned it and then ripped the tree bark down all the way to the point of the graft, right where my finger is. Let's tip this back a little further. So this gash runs about 3 inches long and right into the graft. And again, I can prune this branch back and then wait the 3 to 5 years for this wound to heal over, or try to select a better variety, but this one is not ideal. Even though, again, the plant from up above looks great. This one over here is the one I'm going with. If you take a look, it's also a younger rootstock. You can see, indicated by it's a lot smaller. And again, there's gonna be some cleanup to do once we take it home. There's a little bit of dead ends within the plant. The nursery that sold it obviously didn't spend that much time per plant preparing them for sale, but we're gonna clean that up together once we take it back to the home garden. And this will be the Mr. Lincoln of choice that will be taken home. So follow me to the home garden. And now we're going to do a few lessons now here at the home garden. Firstly, we're gonna prune the Double Delight roses that are here behind me. If you wanna come in a little closer, I wanna share with you how beautiful these roses are. Just take a look at that beautiful coloration. In regards to the Double Delight, I would say the name is attributed to, if you take a look at a younger rose over here, you can see how it opens with the darker pink and then it opens up with a much lighter, and the scent is unmatched. It's one of the best smelling roses. However, as we said earlier, if you're looking for that original scented rose, that's got to be the Mr. Lincoln. Most of the petals have fallen since we picked it up from the nursery, but you can see when we shared it with you a couple days ago, it was in perfect form. And then over here is the climbing Don Juan rose, and the intentions are to put the Don Juan rose to my right, and it'll climb over the trellis behind me on the right side, and then we're going to put the Mr. Lincoln on my left side. So let me begin by sharing three very helpful tips. The first one is the best time to be pruning your roses, no matter where you are in the country, is after the last chance of frost has passed, but before the spring growth begins to push. Most people, especially here in Southern California, are eager to prune their roses as soon as they stop performing, which is typically between November and December. but that's flawed. The better time to be pruning your roses is towards the end of January, after that last chance to frost is passed, and you can begin your pruning of the roses as early February. So that's tip number one. Number two, make sure that the structure of your rose is always in a vase shape. I can pull up this plant over here, nearest you, and you can see that the general goal is to make sure that the stem and the branches are growing in a vase shape, and this is not the best example. As you can see, these two branches over here, if I can pull this out of the way, you can see that these branches are pretty tight to one another. The goal is to basically get all of these branches growing in a direction away from the center so that all of the branches can maximize and capitalize on light. That'll result in a much healthier plant structure, more disease-free, with more gorgeous, longer lasting, and overall you're going to end up with a healthier plant. So step two is to make sure that when you prune your plant, you're striving for a vase shape. Let me share with you what's going on behind me. If I use my shovel as an indicator of the center of the plant, which I'm now positioning my shovel right here in the center, so hopefully you can see where that where the center of the structure of the rose is. You can see down there that there's 1, 2, 3 branches that I've been training, and a couple more suckers below that I've been training to grow in the outward position, and they're growing outwards from the center of this shovel. However, if you back up, as it's been growing over the last 6 to 8 months, you can see that these branches are now collapsing on one another. The leaves are now competing for sunlight. They're also trapping excess moisture, which leads to mildew within the plant. And this here is some evidence of that disease. If you come in a little closer, you can see on the leaves, that's mildew. And there's also some other fungal diseases that are starting to accumulate within the plant, as the plant is really in desperate need of pruning. And I'm a little bit behind, but I was truly waiting for that Ivory Organic 6 Macros fertilizer launch so I can teach all of these lessons all at once and in one video. So hopefully you'll get to see all of that, and I'll share with you the follow-up to all this within the next 30 to 60 days, and you're going to see the remarkable results that we're going to get from doing this pruning lesson that we're going to do right now together. When pruning, I've got my pruners now. Keep an eye out for the nodes and try to anticipate the direction that each of these nodes are going to grow. For example, if I were to prune this row structure, which is growing into our pathway here, if we follow it down, you can see here that there is an eye right there on the tip of my finger. If I prune it, and when you prune, you're going to prune it at an angle. If I were to prune it at this direction, what's going to result is the branch is going to come out of this eye in the direction heading right back into the center of the plant. Ideally, what you're going to need to do, and I'm going to do the prune first, and I'm going to share with you the results. So if you can see when I prune, I'm pruning about 1/4 of an inch above the eye, but you can't see it until after I make this cut. So I'm going to make the cut, and then I'm going to back out with the plant carefully. I'm going to make another cut here to make some more room. And the lesson is this: the bud or the eye is right there. This was once a leaf that was coming out of this particular location, and now what's going to end up coming out of this spot is a subsequent branch, and at the end of the branch we're going to get to enjoy a lot more roses. And again, this is going to improve the structure, the health, and the quality of each of the roses by doing this. I'm going to apply that principle throughout, and I'll be back with you in about the next 5 to 10 minutes. So let me get this done. Another lesson I came across, if you come in a little closer, you may notice that there's also some deadwood within here. As you can imagine, with that much of a structure shading the underlying branches, again, another reason to continuously prune your roses no less than once a year. We already told you when, but no less than once a year, to make sure that all of the branches and those leaves are able to reach the sunlight and do all of the things that the plant needs to metabolize and create the proteins and the sugars and the necessary vitamins and nutrition for the health of the plant. So when it comes to deadwood, the lesson on that is the time for pruning deadwood is any time of year. If you see it, cut it out. This is again another entryway for beetles and termites that are drawn to it to work their way through the deadwood, and they can end up working their way into the living tissues within the rose as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut that out like so. and now we got the dead wood out. And then the goal is hopefully more of the resources from the plant, because you can see we cut down to where the living tissue is down here. You can see that that tissue is still alive. That will eventually heal over, and all the resources will continue going in the right direction, supporting this particular cane. The other thing I want to share with you down here, there's quite a few weeds in between. We're going to end up feeding and remulching this area. What we're going to have to do is remove all of the weeds, otherwise the fertilizer we're going to be putting in the soil is going to go to the benefit of these weeds as well. And we don't want to share all of the added benefits of what we're going to do to the soil for these guys. There's also over here some palms that are also growing. There's hundreds of these, and I know some of you guys wish you had them on your property, but again, these grow like weeds because of all the surrounding California fan palms that are in our neighborhood. So again, we're going to remove all of the weeds within this area. We're also going to remove last year's wood chips, and the reason behind that is we're trying to also remove all of the diseases that the rose carries within those leaves that is shedded by last year's growth. We want to remove that from the floor. If you come in a little closer, you can probably see all of this rose matter that's in between the wood chips, but we're going to basically lay down a new layer of wood chips. Also going to remove that layer of wood chips from last year, as well as all of the diseased leaves, and roses are prone to basically carrying that disease cycle from last year into the following year. The goal is to hopefully remove those spores and disease that may have existed on those leaves from passing into the next year's growth. So we're going to remove all of the wood chips as well, and we're going to use them in another part of the garden, away, very far away from the rose bed, in a place where there won't be any contamination between the spores and the disease relating to roses to another type of plant that will not be affected by this, but we can continue using these wood chips and mulch as we've got wood chips throughout the entire garden. But what we're going to do here is we're going to lay a new layer of wood chips, and we're going to do that together. I'm going to share with you the steps on how we're going to do that. So I'm going to continue cleaning this up as well while we continue pruning the rest of the roses behind me. So here we are now. We just pretty much cleaned it all up. We pruned all the roses. We removed all of the leaf litter as well as the wood chips underlying the roses. Let me share with you an example of what we've done over here now that we've pruned. This one here is one of the largest roses. And bear in mind, some of these roses I found out were planted as early as 1970. So these roses are about 40 years old. And these are the original roses. There's some of the roses within here I've created through by way of cutting. If you take a look over here, and I'm not done with this pruning, but you can see over here there's another dead branch. So we're going to prune that back to the lowest branch. But this one here is going to go into container. So maybe we can do this lesson together real quick. You can see that there's a bud over here, a bud over here, and again the goal is that all of the buds are pointing away from the center. This bud is going off towards the outside, this bud is going out towards the outside, and this one's complete. Let's do another recap over here. Over here the bud is pointed in the outward direction. Here's the center right where my pruners are. This bud is over here, in the direction of the wall. It'll go towards the wall and up. You can see these have already started sprouting, as these were already growing prior to pruning it. Same thing over here. This bud is over here in this direction, another bud over here in this direction. This one over here I've got pointed up. This one over here has a bud going in that direction, and this bud going in this direction. And this one over here is another sucker rose that came off the root. And again, these roses are not grafted. All of these roses are original from cuttings. Like I said, some of them over 40 years old. And what we're going to do is pretty much space and thin some of these out. The first one over there in the corner, we're going to uproot and transplant together, and to make way for the Don Juan climbing rose that's going to work its way up and onto the trellis. Before we transplant that one particular rose in the corner to make way for the Don Juan rose, let me share with you another quick lesson on pruning. So follow me over to this side. So this rose over here is known as the iceberg rose variety, and this particular rose is very disease resistant. This particular, again, the iceberg rose, a very disease free type of rose. The two lessons I want to share with you on this one is, firstly, you may notice a lot of spent roses, spent to the point that they're even fruiting. If you come in a little closer, you can see all these rose hips, as they're also known, where they're basically fruiting, creating seeds that can also then be planted once they dry. once they basically dry out, you can use those seeds to basically plant and create another generation of roses that'll be related to the iceberg. It may not be exactly an iceberg, as it may have cross-pollinated also with some of the surrounding roses, and that's typically how hybrid tea roses are also generated and created. When you take a look at this rose, the other thing I want to share with you, so the first tip, again, when you see all of these spent roses, the tip is to remove the roses. So when you see these roses that are now turning brown, by pruning them off, it's going to immediately encourage the rose to create some more buds and more roses to be enjoyed for a longer season. However, if it goes into the fruiting stage, which is where they're seeding over here with these rose hips, that's going to take away from the resources and the energy within the plant to create some more color, which is the true reason we planted this rose, is for the color in the roses, not so much for the rose hips and the fruiting bodies. So again, whenever you see your spent roses, remove them, tip one. Tip two is take a look at the structure of the rose. With this particular variety, the goal is to create more of a bush, compact plant, whereas there's a couple of branches that are now growing in tree form. If the goal is to have a tree form type of rose, then the goal would be to remove the bush structure towards the bottom. That'll encourage more growth at this higher elevation. But that is, again, not the goal here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take back all of these tree stalks to encourage more growth into the lower branches to create a more compact and bushy structured rose. And we're gonna accomplish that together right now. So I'm looking now, again, for a location where there's a bud that I can prune. Again, 1/4 of the way, and the bud I'm looking at is right there on the tip of my finger. That was once a leaf. It's always right at the leaf scar that you'll always find the leaf bud that'll create the next branch. And now there'll be growth from this direction out. We're gonna do the same thing over here. This one is a little bit more obvious as the leaves are still attached. And what we'll do in this scenario is we're going to prune right over here with the intentions that we're gonna get growth that is going to come up and out in this direction. And now what we're gonna do is basically prune back the rest of the spent roses, and we can expect another bouquet like iceberg rose with, again, at least a couple of dozens, if not close to 50 roses per month by removing all of these spent roses. So let me clean this up. Just a couple more rose hips to remove, and voila, we're done. I even found a little set of rosebuds over here that'll create the next bunch of roses while the rest of the plant recovers from this pruning. And here's another set of 3 more flowers that'll be coming shortly. And we'll get to enjoy some colors in as little as another week or two while the rest of the plant begins to grow and push out some new buds. Now let's get back to the Double Delight roses. Follow me. So now we're basically going to uproot this particular Double Delight rose. And again, we're going to transplant it to another property in about a week or two. In the meantime, we're going to put it in a container. And what I'm doing, I'm going about 6 to 8 inches around the root zone. I'm definitely pruning some of the roots to this rose, but we've removed and pruned so much off the top to compensate for what we're about to do. And now we can pull back, and I can hear the roots starting to pull out of the soil. And here we go a little further. And here it comes. And now what we're gonna do is simply take our container, we're gonna add a little bit of compost to it, like so. I'm not going into detail about potting it because this plant is not gonna be potted. We've got so many lessons on potting. For potting, you're gonna use potting soil. But again, this is just gonna be a temporary home where it's gonna eventually wound up, where it's gonna finally end up being in the ground. So using compost is acceptable, and in fact it's preferred over using a potting mix, as you wouldn't want potting mix soil into your in-ground plantings, as that'll absorb too much water and lead to rot. So here we are. We're simply gonna take our rose structure. As you can see, this here is the rose. Right there is the crown. These are all the branches coming out of the crown. This here is the primary root that's coming down and around. You can remove some of the excess soil around the top. The goal is to keep some of the soil intact with the roots. And now we're gonna put it into the container like so. And when we backfill it with some more soil, we're gonna go up all the way to the same position that it was in the ground. I'm adding a little bit of pressure around the root. And to basically eliminate any air pockets that may be exposing the roots to drying out. And that'll conclude it. Now we're just going to add some water. The last thing we're going to do to help with the transplant shock is we're going to take our 3-in-1 ready-to-use spray. And so the last thing we're going to do is use the ready-to-use spray. You can either use the ready-to-use spray, which will be a lot easier than passing a brush through the rose plant. But here's the Ivory Organics 3-in-1 Plant Guard ready-to-use spray, protection against damaging sunburn, insects, and rodents. Some of you may notice when we're at the Huntington garden, we found a rose bush that basically had all of these leaves and flowers that were on the outer parts of the rose structure, but the whole inside of the plant was exposed to too much sun from year to year and decade after decade, to the point that the inner part of the rose started to burn, showing first would be a discoloration of the skin, second, some cracking happening, but third-degree burns being the underlying wood structure was now exposed. The cambium tissues were damaged, and all the life is now passing from the non-sunny, the shaded side of the branch structure. So to prevent any burn from happening to the plant, now that there's basically no canopy to shade and protect those underlying branches and trunk, you can simply go with a spray like this and spray the entire structure, leaves and all. And if you come in a little closer, you may notice, and you can see the product creating an organic sunblock protection on the leaf, and that same protection is all over the stem. If you want to be extra precautious, you can take a product like this, and this here is the Ivory Organics 3-in-1 Plant Guard. Again, same label, protection against damaging sunburn, insects, and rodents. And this here is color brown. It's also available in colors green and white. And I want to make sure I stir this as we've used it earlier today. And what we can do is simply brush it on to the entire structure, and we can get even more protection to the plant by doing this. Most importantly also, aside from protecting the tree trunk, is all of this exposed wood over here is also a potential entryway for beetles and termites. And some of you may have noticed that in your rose bushes. And instead of using a tar-based product or even a latex-based product that's going to trap moisture and trap disease and mildew within this wood, and again, this wood is still alive and thereby there's going to be moisture there, that's going to trap moisture that's going to result in rot. This product does not trap moisture, and to the contrary, it allows water to pass while still creating a barrier that repels insects and pests from entering. So we're just going to now coat, and let's do this together. You can see we can now coat, and this is now going to be our rose sealant done in an organic way. Not using tar, not using latex, and all the other buds can just be brushed right over, and the buds will grow right through this brushed on product. And you can see how natural the color brown looks. And again, it's also available in color green, as these stems are green. So if you wanted green, that would work. And then white naturally is going to reflect the most amount of light, but any protection is going to help prevent the sunburn to the plant. That was actually quite easy. I wasn't planning on brushing this product on, but here we did it together. And now we've got a much more thicker protected coated plant, and the goal is we're going to take this down to another property within the upcoming week or two, and then plant that there where that person will get to enjoy these Double Delight roses from my garden. Let's get on to the next step. So now we got a little hole that just started with having transplanted now the Double Delight rose. What we're going to do now is make a hole and preparing this area for the planting of the Don Juan climbing rose. So again, the goal with this one is to bring it up and around onto our trellis. And so with this Don Juan rose, what we're going to do is prepare the hole. The goal is, when planting and preparing the hole, is to dig no deeper than the size of the container, and you can go a little bit wider than the container to encourage the roots to grow in this direction. Not necessarily deeper. The risk with going deeper is that the plant will begin to settle within that hole if you go too deep. It's been a while since we did a planting video, so I want to share this is now going to be a very important key tip. I'm going to actually put it in the right below at the bottom of the screen, and that is when we prepare the hole, and here's the hole. Old directions, the traditional way, and I'm going to spell this out, the traditional old style method of planting would be to basically, as much native soil as you've pulled out, the goal is to add as much compost to the native soil. So this here is the compost. So if I've got 1 or 2 shovel scoops of native soil that came out of the hole, the goal is to add 1 or 2 shovel scoops of compost to it, mix it together, and use that as the backfill. The new way of gardening going forward is to add very little to no compost to the hole. The logic being is that this compost is going to continue breaking down to basically non-existence. It's going to break down, and what's going to be left behind is the mineral that's left in the soil. We're talking about the clay and the sand and all the mineral parts that make up soil. Compost is typically found on the surface, and to find organic matter such as this and any organic matter within the soil is typically less than 3%, and 3% is a high number with most university studies across the country. So if we're putting 50% organic matter into your mineral soil is a very high number, when the statistical natural soil across the country is below 3%, and that 3% includes earthworms and other biology such as your beneficial bacteria and your fungus and all these other things that are also living things within your soil. I'm hoping this registers with you that the goal is to add minimal amounts of compost, and the goal again is just to add some breathable space within the soil, but it should not be used as a filler. We're going to use the compost as a dressing on the surface towards the end of this, but let's get started with the planting. And again, all I'm going to do is simply take a handful of compost and add that to the soil, and that's it. I'm not going to add what would otherwise traditionally be a whole bucket to match as much as we've basically taken out of the planting hole. So now we're just going to simply mix this mixture. And then we're going to remove the soil to make way for the planting. What we're going to do next is add a little bit of fertilizer to the base of the hole. Over here I've got to my left the 6 macros products. We're going to go into greater detail with this, but over here you can see is again the 6 macros premium blend, and over here is the 6 macros super blend. I've already opened the 4-pound bag, but I'm going to be using this. The benefit of it again is it's got nitrogen 13%, phosphorus 12%, potassium 13%, magnesium 1%, sulfur 3%, calcium 3%, and it's derived from a whole paragraph of ingredients. You won't find an organic fertilizer with this many ingredients, but let me just read a few of them. Feather meal, alfalfa meal, fishbone meal, kelp meal, cottonseed meal, potassium sulfate, glacial rock sulfate, neem cake, phosphate, rock phosphate, oyster shell flour, and it just goes on and on and on. The point is, when adding it to your soil, the goal is you're going to continuously feed the earthworms within the soil, the beneficial bacteria, the beneficial fungus, and it has also over here, if you take a look, even more beneficial microbes and mycorrhiza within the product to continuously feed those organisms. The premium fertilizer, on the other hand, if we take a look at the back of it, has lower NPK, highest calcium, and on the back has a lot fewer, as this is a more affordable line of the Ivory Organics fertilizers, but it still contains 1% of the 6 macros plus super blend. So again, that's on the premium blend, but we're going to be using the super blend right now, and all I'm going to do is simply add a tablespoon of the product to the base of it. And the product again can be used as a soil feed. Again, that'll feed your soil for about 60 to 90 days. It can also be added to a gallon of water to create a liquid fertilizer. The 4-pound bag will make 120 gallons of foliar or liquid fertilizer, and then it can also be used as a supplement to your compost tea. So here we are. We're just going to sprinkle that into the planting hole, and this here again is going to attract a lot of the living organisms within the soil. It's also going to create more life with the beneficial bacteria and mycorrhizal spores that are within it. But the goal is to also draw upon all of the earthworms that are within the soil that'll eat some of that organic matter and further break it down into the elements to feed the rose plant. So here we are now with our rose, and this here is going to go in place just like so. We're going to keep our hand on the rootstock, tap around the pot, examine the base of the roots. If there's any root-bound roots, we're going to pull back on those. Any of these coiled roots, so you can see that some of these roots are beginning to coil. We can simply pull and even rip them off so that they don't continue to strangle and girdle the structure as it grows in time. I'd rather it push new roots in that direction. So here we go, and then we're going to wake up the rest of the plant by just running our fingers along the edges of where it was once in the pot to tell it you're no longer in the pot, and you can now stretch your roots out and into the ground. So here we go. The goal when planting it is to make sure it's at the same height it was within the container. Right now it's about a ½ an inch lower, so we're going to get some more soil. And now we've got the height just right. And now we'll backfill the soil. You now know, because you didn't add so much compost into this mix, that the plant is not going to settle in the upcoming weeks and months, and then you're going to find your plant is planted too deep, and you're going to notice that your stem possibly root rotting because it was planted too deep when originally you may have started at the right place. So again, the tip on this one is to not add too much compost when preparing your planting. The other thing too, I'm examining real quick while I'm planting, and I should have done this first, is I'm pulling back on some of the soil near the surface and examining to see where the primary roots are, because sometimes the nursery will plant the rows a little bit too deep, and I can see that the first roots are right here. We can see the first one together right there. So what I'm going to do is actually further pull the plant up a little higher and now begin the backfilling. So we've even elevated even further. Right here is where the roots are. If it's planted too deep, the risk is stem rot, as it's going to be in contact with soil that's on the stem rather than on the root zone. And now we can simply backfill all of this soil. We're going to add a little bit of pressure around the root zone. Not too much, but enough just to eliminate any air pockets that may be in that root zone. And now what we're going to do is with the fertilizer is we're going to add about 2 tablespoons of fertilizer around each of the plants. 1 and 2. And we're going to do the same around every single one of these roses, and we're going to repeat this every 60 to 90 days during the entire growing season. So what we're going to do next is simply scratch, using your hand tool, the fertilizer into the surface soil. We're only scratching at about 1/4 of an inch just to get the fertilizer into contact with the soil, so it's not just floating on the surface. And again, you can see how quickly this can be done. And before we add a layer of wood chips, returning a fresh layer of wood chips as a bed around each of these roses, I'm going to add a little bit of compost now to the surface soil. As we said, it's not recommended to put that much compost into your planting, as compost is typically found at the surface of the soil. And with every single watering, the benefits of the compost will break down and further enrich the soil and also offer insulation to the soil, curbing the extremes of the summer hot days, then also insulating the plant, keeping them warmer during the coldest nights and even in the coldest nights of winter. So let's continue around each of the plants like so. So the next step is adding wood chips, basically mulching around each of the roses. When adding your wood chips, also known as mulching around your plants, make sure that you add about a 2 to 3 inch layer around each of the plants, and make sure that you pull it back away from the stem. Again, the risk is if these wood chips, and what they'll do is absorb and retain a lot of water, if they're in contact with the trunk of the rose, and this applies to any of your other plants in your garden, it could potentially lead to another phenomenon known as stem rot. So make sure you pull back all of these wood chips from the plant, and you're basically building it up as you get away from your rose. And we're going to continue this process throughout. You can see over here, there's another issue. If you come in a little closer, I'm hoping the camera can capture it, but as I was pulling this back, and notice right in this zone right over here, there's a couple of holes working their way into the crown of this particular rose. And over here there's, again, this is an issue with beetles potentially digging and working their way into. The point is, again, when applying your wood chips to your rose, as we did with the first rose, is make sure you keep the wood chips away from the crown and the stem of the plant. You're going to want to build it up as you get away from the rose and not put it directly on top of the rose, such as this. This would be a disaster and will definitely lead to stem rot and shorten the life of your rose. So you want to make sure that all of that gets off of the entire crown and away from the stem to prevent that disease from happening. Furthermore, what we can do is we're also going to take our Ivory Organics 3-in-1 plant guard, and we haven't done this as we did with the transplanted rose, where we're simply going to go with our brush and we're going to brush the entire crown. That'll further protect it and prevent any entry by termites and beetles or any other pests. And we're also preserving the entire crown. As you can see, there's a lot of dead wood from past pruned branches that were coming off of it. And I'm sure if you examine your roses, you'll notice the same. And then all of the exposed surfaces we're also going to coat as well. If you've got the time, it would be of value to brush it on as well. If you don't have time and you want to do it fast, you can simply go with your ready-to-use spray and spray the entire structure to help reduce the risk of burn when the sun returns tomorrow. This here is also going to help our Don Juan climbing rose avoid any transplant shock when the sun returns tomorrow to it, as it'll keep the plant and all of those leaf tissues further protected from the extremes of the sun. So the last step is to soak your roses. Water them thoroughly, especially after fertilizing. And in the upcoming week, I'll probably water my rose bed probably 2 to 3 times again, as the temperatures are warmer this time of year. And again, in the summer, just a general watering practice, you may need to water your roses as often as maybe twice a week, maybe 3 times if it's extreme temperatures. And in the winter, on average, I'll water my roses maybe once a week, and in the fall once a week, and in the winter probably once or twice a month. The general principle and the rule, if you come in a little closer, you may notice this, but the general rule when it comes to watering is to soak your plants, and then when it comes to not re-water your plants until the soil is dry, but never bone dry, because you don't want to also kill all of the soil microorganisms that are in there. You got to think about the beneficial bacteria, the fungus, and the earthworms need water too. It's not just the plants. You got to keep all of that life in the soil alive too. So you water them. And roses prefer being soaked, and pretty much this applies to most plants. Soak them well and don't water them again until the soil is dry, but never bone dry. Those are key words. And we're just going to continue this and finish with the rest of the roses within the next 20 to 30 minutes. But I pretty much recapped all of the lesson when it comes to planting and transplanting and pruning your roses. And if there's any other questions you may have, feel free to write me in the comments below. So if you've enjoyed this educational video, be sure to give us a thumbs up. And most importantly, by subscribing below, you'll be connected to this and all of our other educational gardening videos. Thanks again for watching, and happy gardening.